discuss on the spot. One thing that I always say, just because I'm here presenting doesn't mean I know anything about this. So if you think I'm wrong, if there's something you don't agree, let me know, discuss and see what's the actual truth. So a little bit about Metropolis. We are a company that was created by SEAT. The main objective is to build mobility products, so everything that includes moving people from point A to point B in the best, in cleanest way, and to remove cars from inside the cities. We are based here in Barcelona. We are now a team of around 25, and of course we are also hiring, so feel free to let us know. Now, in order for you to get more or less a view of how hard or easy it was for us to build a test framework for our products, I'm going to show you our products in action. So this is our bus on demand application. Basically, it's a passenger app, a driver app, and an admin panel that controls the whole system. Here you can see that the passenger is creating a new booking request. So he wants to go from point A to point B, and you request a bus to pick him up. And he's creating the booking, and the system is reading the request, and now he has the booking. As you can see here, in the admin panel, you can see the booking request, and that is already assigned to a driver. So next off, the driver is going to go on shift, or he's starting his shift, and he's going to pick up the passenger. So he's going to start moving towards the passenger, and when he's at the pickup location that the passenger requested, he's going to pick him up. After he picks him up, he's going to drive towards the location of the drop-off, and he's going to drop him off. As you see, all the location is synchronized between all the clients, and I'm going to show you the technologies we use to achieve that. This whole platform was built to be used with a passenger and driver application, but the company that requested us right now is not using the passenger application, so we had to make it possible also for the service manager or the admin to create bookings. So this is a web application, and that can also create bookings and requests. And as you can see, the same thing. Everything synchronizes with everything. We are using Firebase real-time database, and there's no need for calls or anything. And that's it. Now, as I said before, the architecture. As you can see here, we have one iOS passenger application, one Android passenger application, and one Android driver application. The admin panel you saw, it's a web application. Controlling all of this, we have an API that is connected to a small SQL database, and that is controlling all the requests and making sure that they can fit in the whole job of the driver. We have a routing algorithm that communicates with Google Maps and OSRM for the routing, and everything is deployed on the Cloud Foundry server. So next off is our other product. This one is a bit more simpler, just because there's no admin panel, there's no service manager, there's only a one-to-one, so one application that can have both roles, both driver and passenger, and it can be one driver to one passenger, or one driver to up until, I don't know, 5 passengers or something. And here we see that the driver is creating a trip. This application is more for commuting from outside the city to inside the city, so from work to home, or from home to work, and people share a car, so it's a ride-sharing application. So here the driver is accepting the request from the passenger, and then he's going to start the trip, same as before with a driver. He's going to start the trip, the location of the driver is always available for the passenger when he's reaching the pickup location. He's going to pick him up, or he can say that he didn't show or whatever. And then at the end, when they reach the destination, he's going to do the checkout, and he's going to pay him the total amount. That's it. Right now we still don't have payments, but we are working on it, so that's another massive pain. As I said before, this is a little bit simpler, just because there's only two applications, so iOS and Android. There's one Cloud Firestore database in the middle, and the API communicates with Google Maps just to get the routes, and everything is deployed on Google Cloud Functions, so it's serverless, so we don't have a state for the application. We just know that the code is there, it's running, and we have no idea what's happening. So, my proposal for this talk is to give you some hints or what I did in order to create a test framework. The first thing that I say always to anyone that asks me where should I start is you need to know your application. So if you don't know your application, you cannot start writing tests. So first off, the most important thing is manual testing before creating any test. So you by testing manually, you get to know how everything works, the architecture of the application, as I show now, the API, how the API is called by the clients, how the requests are made, the databases, how they save the data, and how that data is taken from one side to the other, and the environments. You need to know how to boot up the environments, how to put them down to make sure that the clients can figure out what to do if the actual server is down. So that, for me, this is the main thing. After that, of course, you need to know how to code. So after you learn the basics of any programming language, can be Java, can be Kotlin, can be Python, can be Ruby, whatever you want. The main thing to learn is object-oriented and solid principles, because in order to build a good test framework, you need to have good principles in order to make it maintainable and not just a random spaghetti of code. And learn some test automation patterns that I'm going to talk about as well. At Metropolis, we use Java and Kotlin just because I had previous experience with Java, and when I went to the company, they told me that the official language was Kotlin. So Kotlin is brand new, everyone is starting to use it, so I said, why not? So I also had to learn how to develop in Kotlin. I always recommend that you use the language of the developers, especially the backend developers, because if you have any issue, and you are going to have issues for sure, you need to go to the developers and ask for help, otherwise you're screwed. If you don't know how to code, there's thousands of online free tutorials, videos. For example, I was talking to a person here that told me that she's learning on Udemy, so everything is for free, so you can learn online really easily. After that, you start to think about the tools that you actually need to start automating or to start creating your whole infrastructure. Restassured, we use it for API testing. Again, you can use restassured with JVM languages, or you can go with PyTest and requests for Python, or Ruby must have something similar. So it doesn't matter the language, for sure they will have an API testing library and a test runner, for example, TestNG in Java. You can use any unit in C#, you can use whatever you want. For the web UI testing, we went with Selenium, and that's just because when I was working at CMP before, we had everything in Selenium, and it's the most widely used tool, so it was very, very clear and obvious where to go. And it's cross-platform, and this matters to us because one of the clients, it's a big corporation, so they use only Internet Explorer and Firefox. So we had to go with Selenium, and we cannot use, for example, Cypress because of this. Appium. I'm going to start with Appium just because, you know, whenever you go to a conference, whenever you search online, is the #1 test automation tool for mobile. Again, as Selenium, cross-platform, open source. I'm going to talk about why this is important in a few slides. It's available in many languages, and for me, one thing that is important, and it's going to be more correct in the next point, is that you just need to learn one language and one platform. Why do I say this? Because when we were building our framework, we were taking too long, so the developers started building their own framework using their own native tools. So that means Expresso for Kotlin and XUI test for iOS. And it's a good thing because the developers can write their own tests and we can write the tests on their platforms. But for us, is another language to learn and another platform to learn how it works and everything. I'm not saying it's bad. If you have developers as good as we have at Metropolis, please go and learn from them. But this talk, I'm just going to focus on that. Another good thing why Espresso in Kotlin is good, because it's easier to mock API calls, states of the apps, and deep links. Deep links are very useful to skip through application parts that you don't need to go all the time. Next off, for the continuous integration tool, well, I chose Jenkins because it's the #1 tool out there. For the reporting tool, we chose Allure. Again, Allure it's available for a lot of different languages, and it goes inside Jenkins as with a plugin, so it's super easy to use. Use a test environment that you have full control over. So as I said before, you can shut down the server, you can bring it up, you can disconnect the database, you can break the whole database, and you need a test environment for that. And you need devices to test on. It can be real devices connected to a machine, it can be emulators, simulators, or cloud device farms like source farms, for example. Now, I want to ask you a question. Who here has heard about page object or page factory patterns? Okay, 10 people. And what about screenplay pattern? 3 people. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the page object or page factory design pattern. This is important in the same way that I said before about solid and object-oriented programming. If you want to build a good framework that is going to be used and maintained by other people and they need to understand your code, you need to have your code organized well and in a way that is maintainable. So when, for example, the login page shows changes for some reason, you don't need to change 100 tests, you just change the login page and that's it. So basically, page object, the test automation design pattern is a way to organize your code. With page object, you have one class per page or per component, depending on their size. For me, I prefer to have my classes really small, so whenever there's a controller or a component in a page, I just create another class for it. And then the tests call the actual methods, so there's no direct interaction between the elements of the page and the test. So the test code is completely separate from the actual elements. Here, in this diagram, it shows more or less how the page object works. In the base page, you have everything that you need to use as a helper functions. So this is going to be used on all the other classes, and this is the elements that are present in 2 or more pages. And here then you have the login page. You have the selectors, the elements that are only present on the login page, and you have the actions that are going to be called by the tests to do actions on your application. Maybe this is easier for you to understand. So here you have one test. This code is using Selenium, but it could be, and it's Kotlin, but it could be with any other language. So you create a login page class. You're going to call the login and submit method that is present here in this page class, and then you're going to assert that this method actually returns a true. As you see, there's no interaction between the elements of the page and the actual test, so everything is separated. In the page class, as I said before, you have the elements here and the methods that you are going to interact with your tests. Any doubts? No? Over.
Well, just a question. I saw that you have mixed page objects with selenium classes. So have you ever thought that, for example, might be in the future you might need to replace the test framework that you're using by something else? Because previously I saw several approaches. One of them is that, like the one that you are using here, and another one is that you have everything that is encapsulating selenium interactions in an absolutely different package. So you have a wrapper over the selenium driver, and then you basically wrap all the methods where you manipulate with Dolman, you make weights and stuff like that. So you can reuse that driver, that is wrapped in the selenium driver, and you can also use, for example, appium methods behind that. So you have the same manipulation, for example, on app and mobile. See what I mean?
That makes sense. I saw that working in some other companies. One thing that I'm going to say in the slides is that this is one way of doing it. So there's hundreds of ways of doing it, and I did this way because I'm not a developer. I know basic knowledge of programming. So if you want to do something like that, like a wrapper and everything, you need more knowledge.
Okay, I'm just curious about your impression of which approach is better, because this one is a little bit more simple, and it allows you to make
simple
faster.
Is the key.
Yeah.
The key
Okay.
word. Yeah. For me, my reason to do this talk is to show people that want to start, so they have no knowledge whatsoever.
Okay.
You know. But yeah, I saw that working, and it's true. It's one way of doing it, and another way of doing it is using the screenplay pattern that it doesn't have page objects at all.
Okay.
So everything is more towards actions, and it's going to use what you said, the wrapper around the driver, so you can use whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
So now screenplay pattern. The girls in the back, the people in the back sofa, they know more about this than me. So if you want to talk to them at the end, feel free. I decided to still show you more or less how this works, because it's good to know that there are other things out there, as you mentioned. And I'm just going to go over it very, very quickly. If you want to know more information, go to this website, and it's a link to a conference talk about Serenity VDD. That is usually how people use screenplay pattern. So the major difference between screenplay and page object is that the actions are done by actors. So instead of pages, it's actors. So as you see here, instead of creating a page, I'm creating an actor, and the actor then has its methods. And as you were saying before, here you can send whatever driver you want. It can be a browser, it can be a device, it can be an API call, it can be anything. The structure of the code, as you see, is very different as well. For example, the only UI classes are these three. The rest is everything is towards actions of the actor itself. So as I said before, I never use this. I saw some conference talks. I know it exists, but I'm going to show you also why I chose page object. As I said before, it's the only pattern I use, and is the most widely used whenever you search for things online. I'm not a developer. I have basic programming knowledge, so this is by far the easiest one to get started. Since we are just starting both the products and the test framework, page object is better suited for these cases, because, for example, if you want to use screenplay pattern, the product needs to be almost stuck, so it can sustain very small changes. Page object is better for when the UIs keep changing all of that. Now API testing. We chose the restassured just because I had the previous experience before. This is a very simple API test that is present on the restassured website. If you want to know more about this, please do, because for me, API testing is very important, not just for the testing itself, but how you can use it to improve your UI testing. I'm going to show it next. But as I was talking the other day with Danielle, API testing is really fun because all the tests are atomic and super fast. So it's in the place of one Selenium test, you can have 100 API tests. So I advise everyone to check out some API testing for the products and tools that you are using. Okay, I'm not going to show this. What I said, API calls to help the UI tests. This is one of the latest things that I'm seeing in all the conference talks. It's how to use API calls to help your UI tests. So for example, let's take a look at this test. This is done only through UI with Selenium, for example. You open the browser, you go to the URL, you create a user through the UI, you confirm the email through the UI, you log in, and you assert that the user is logged in. This usually takes, I don't know, 40 seconds, 1 minute. Now, the same test using API helpers, for example, to create the user and to confirm the email, it takes you 10 seconds. So this is very powerful because if you have 100 tests and you always need to create a user and go through the login, you're going to save a lot of time in your tests. What can I do through the API or database? I mentioned here database because a lot of these things you can also do directly accessing the database from your code. The thing is, it's not advisable. One, for security reasons, and two, because if you're using the API, you're also testing the API. So it's better to do it through the API. But sometimes, for example, at Metropolis, we are using Firebase, and some actions we can only do through accessing Firebase directly and changing data. So sometimes you need to use a database, but it's not advisable. So what can you do through the API or database? Well, clean up your test environment, create the data needed for a test, change data needed during a test run. For example, when I was at CMP, we had users that had different status. For example, when we created a user was a trial, and then when he paid, he was upgraded. So, for example, in one test, I create a user and I log in with a user. I check that the user is seeing a warning with a free trial, and then I change the state of the user using for example, the payment gateway that we are using through the API, and I check that the user is already upgraded. And you can do this also to make sure that the payment gateway API is actually working. So in summary, anything you need to do through the UI that takes a long time, do it to the API because it's going to save you a lot of time. One very important thing, if you're missing some endpoints, for example at Metropolis, we needed an endpoint to delete the whole data from one table. So instead of us accessing the table or the database and changing that data, we asked the developers to create an endpoint that we could use during our tests. And this is very good because you also create a connection with the developers to make sure that your tests are important. If you lack these endpoints, go out and ask your developers. As I said before, the advantages, well, faster UI tests, higher maintainability because APIs change way less than UIs, and you don't need to be changing IDEs and page objects all the time. So you just use the API and it's way easier. And it controls the state of your test environment, as I said before, either through the database or the API. Now let's talk a little bit about our drivers, Selenium and Appium. This is a very simple test in Selenium. This is like the hello world of Selenium. So here you create a Firefox driver, you go to a page, you find an element, you interact with that element, and you do an assertion that element has a text, and then you quit the driver. You close the driver. This test will fail, and this is one advice that I have for people just starting. Whenever you write one test, make sure to fail that test first, because it happens to me sometimes, not always, that I create a test, I make it pass in the first time, I then put the application in production, we found a bug, and I'm like, wait, but I had a test for that feature, what happened? Then I go and check the test, and the test is not testing anything, just passing because. So whenever you create a test, make sure that you make it fail first, and then make it pass. And this is what they call TDD, so you are also learning something. Now, reasons for using Appium. Well, the alternatives are not cross-platform, so in terms of QA, especially if you don't have access to developers or if you're working with an external company that is providing you with an application, Appium is really the only alternative. Expresso and XUI tests are good frameworks, but they are not cross-platform. And for example, with Expresso, you need to have access to the actual code of the application. Appium is open source, so for example, if you are missing something in the Appium itself, you can change it, and you can actually contribute to the repository. You have total control, so you're not dependent on an external company. It happened to me in a previous company that we were using a very expensive automation tool, and they developed a new version that it came out with a lot of improvements, and we were like, okay, let's update. No, you need to pay another 5,000 euros. So language and platform agnostic. As I said before, there's bindings for a lot of technologies. One that is missing now is Go, because it seems that people are not really interested in creating the binding. I don't know why. It's a shame, really. It's widely used by the industry. There's a great community and committers to the project. Whenever you go to a conference, you meet a lot of people that are actually creating the tool, which is nice. There's plenty of consultants available and plenty of workshops. So at first, when we were creating the test framework and we decided to use Appium, I actually got in touch with the creator of Appium, or one of the main committers, and he told me, hey, if you need help, let me know, because this is what I do for a living. Like he actually has a consultancy company that goes to companies and either gives training or actually starts building the framework from scratch. So and it's way cheaper than any other paid tool out there. You have plenty of online tutorials for free. If you go on YouTube and you write Appium, millions of hits appear. And it's really easy to use if you are familiar with Selenium. Easy to use, not really easy, because you're going to hurt a lot when you start using Appium. As I said before, Jenkins, our continuous integration tool, it allows us to run our tests on a schedule or based on the pull requests created by the developers. You can create it on your local machine or on a cloud server with Amazon or whatever you want, and connecting to a CloudOS farm. So how does it work? Really simple. You configure your job, then you start the Jenkins job. It gets the code of your tests. You run the tests or whatever command you tell them to do. Like you can boot emulators, you can do whatever you want as a normal command line. And then the build passes or fails, and you have a feedback from the build. And for that, we use Allure for our reports. Usually, the normal test runner, this is the output. Like this tells you basically nothing. Especially in UI tests, if you want to put some screenshots here or something, it's not going to be readable. And if you want to use Allure, it completely changed my mind from what I was working with before. You can, for example, you can put the screenshot of what the page looked like when it failed. You have the timings, you have the names of the tests, you have the passing and the fails. You have all these metrics to show your PO that is crazy about the graphs and everything. They really like it. So yeah, if you don't have a reporting tool yet, go for it. So everything looks nice, but how does it really work together? Now, this is what it looks like at Metropolis. going through the whole flow of a task or a feature, if you want. First, the product team starts thinking about the feature. The QA team is always present in the meetings. Then the designers meet with the product in order to start thinking about the designs. Again, the QA team is present. This is one thing the first thing I did when I arrived at Metropolis, because we always get bugs or problems that nobody thinks about, and if we are in these meetings, no code is written yet, so we find the bugs really soon in the life cycle of the development. Then the designers do the design, the developers develop the feature, they create a PR. This is just for mobile, because Bitrise is like a Jenkins in the cloud for mobile applications. On Bitrise, after the build is done, like when they run all the unit tests and everything, the build passes, they send an APK file to a server that we created. This is what the server looks like. So we can run our appium tests against any of these branches, so we can know exactly where's the issue. So after the developer develops the feature, the tester grabs the branch, starts testing the feature, and writes test cases if needed. Then the tester creates the automated test if needed. And this is the part we are still finishing. That is running the tests locally on our machine against the feature branch, and then merging and testing against the developed branch. And we want to have a nightly build of with Jenkins against develop to have the fresh tests in the morning, making sure that everything is working fine. Now, this is nothing special. This is, for me, it's a normal architecture, and what we want to achieve that would be really nice is this. So this part is all the same, so I'm going to just focus on this one. The difference here is that on Bitrise we are going to run the XUI tests and Espresso tests, and this is because Bitrise has native plugins for this, and it runs directly on their emulators and simulators and everything. So this means that the build doesn't pass if the XUI tests and Espresso tests fail. So that means that the feedback for the developer is immediate. Like he creates the branch, the build is running on Bitrise, and immediately he gets failed build due to Espresso tests. So now he goes and he fixes it even before it reaches the hands of the tester. Once the build is done, the same thing, the Bitrise sends the APK for the server, and Bitrise calls a URL that starts Jenkins build, testing over that specific APK file. If these tests fail, the developer gets an email or a Slack message with a result, and again, faster feedback, and the developer can immediately fix the error. I really like this because once the tester starts testing the application, his confidence on the status of the application is way higher, because sometimes I get an application to start testing and even the login doesn't work, or the application crashes when it starts booting. It's like, what the fuck? Like, with this, you have way more confidence, and you can focus yourself on not on regression tests, but on exploratory tests around the feature that you are testing. So now for the bad parts, can always be good. Appium is a bit hard to tame. When I was working with Selenium, when I thought about Appium, it sounded really nice. Like, yeah, I just do the same I do in Selenium, and it's easy. You have no idea. Like the amount of issues you have with connecting to devices, the capabilities issues, versions that work on one thing and don't work on the other, the types of drivers that he uses, it's crazy. So GitHub issues is your best friend, and I say this because usually when you have an issue, you go on Stack Overflow and you have the solution. For Appium, not so much. a lot of information is both on the Appium forum and on the GitHub issues on the actual repository on GitHub. So you're going to be spending a lot of time there. Whenever you don't find the solution to your problem, and this happened to me a couple of times, what you're going to do is you need to create an issue on the repository on GitHub. And when that happens, the developers, they ask you for the whole amount of, a big amount of logs from Appium. And when you push the logs there, they're going to tell you, hey, on this line you have the solution for your problem. So when that started to happen, I started to learn, and I started to learn how to read the logs. And it's funny because the amount of logs they put there is not just by random fact, because the actual issue is always there. When I started creating the framework, one thing I thought about doing almost at the beginning was to write the tests in parallel, or to run tests in parallel. Don't do this. This was a mistake, and I lost a lot of time with this. First thing off, you need to make sure that your system supports parallelization. For example, as you saw, one commuti is one-to-one, so it's doable. You have one passenger, one driver, and you run the test and you don't interact with anything else. But for example, on the bus on demand, it's not possible because the whole system is like a living system. So if you create a request on test 1 and another request on test 2, those two requests are going to collide. So it's not doable. So before you start rushing into parallelization, make sure you know how to do it, and make sure your system can actually do it. As for help, developers are your friend. As I said before, pick the same language as your developers, because you're going to have problems for sure, be it with the language specifics or with build tools. For example, I had a lot of issues with Gradle, and I always had to ask help from the developers. Because there's like a million versions for the same API, and one explodes and the other one doesn't. It's crazy. Help with environments. So this is important because usually, especially in a small team like in Metropolis, we don't have a DevOps team. So the actual developers, they create the environments. So they know how to fix the issues, or they know how you can actually control better the environment you're running your tests. Help with Jenkins, same exact thing. The developers, for sure, they are going to have a Jenkins machine running their code and their deployments way before you start writing your tests. So you either use the same Jenkins machine and just ask the developer to install whatever plugin you need, or you start creating your own machine and you ask the developers for help. Well, if developers are not your friends, leave the company. That's pretty much. There's no other way of saying it, especially nowadays with Agile and everything. Is if the developer is a pain in the ass, just leave the company. As Gloria said before, and as I said before, Metropolis is hiring. So if you want to change your company and have good developers working with you, come working with us. And last but not least, one really big issue that I had, and I was talking with Daniel yesterday about this. Make sure you have the time to 100% focus on this, because during this time I had to hire another QAs, I had to test the applications, I had to watch the deployments of our applications, and sometimes I was working on for example, with Appium, and I started having issues, and the PO would come to me, hey, we need to do a release, we need to do a full regression test, and we need to do blah, blah, blah. And the next time I would pick up the Appium stuff 1 week later, I had no idea what the fuck was going on. So make sure you have time to focus, either by hiring people to do the other job that you don't have time to do, or just go to your team and say, okay, so this week I'm 100% focused on this and I cannot do anything else. And that's it. I want to thank you, Zopa, for hosting the meetup, Bugbusters for the meetup group, Metropolis for the opportunity of being here. That's it. Thank you. Any questions?
So how long your entire suite is running?
So as I said before, we don't have the suite is running every day.
Yeah.
But we have Selenium API and appium tests. I try to run them all in a row, so not parallel, and it takes around 15-20 minutes, and it has around 20 tests.
It's a regression.
But it's the amount of tests is just basic stuff.
Okay.
So don't take that number for as a big importance.
Have you tried tools to compare screenshots between the test runs?
I did. I tried to use ApplyTools. Didn't manage to make it work, but this was like a year and something ago, or when they were in the beginning. At CMP before, we were using a tool. Andrea, you remember the name of the tool that checks the screenshots? Was an API that you just put on your code, and it creates like a comparison page, and then you give it depending on the location of the elements, you give it not a delay, like a percentage of error. But it was horrible. It never worked.
Okay.
What's your experience with it?
I tried ApplyTools as well, roughly the same time as you mentioned. It was terrible as far as I remember.
I mean, now I think they are better, and they are pushing a lot on advertisement and everything. So I hope it's a bit better.
It was there as well. So they were like presenting that as a AI that can compare everything and spot a small difference, but in fact,
It's great.
this was not really close.
No, not at all. Anything else?
We also have self-written storage for screenshots, and we store them for last 10 test runs. So for every Selenium call, there is a screenshot, and then if the tests fail, it automatically compares with the previous successful screenshot for the same step, and then it's simple library to compare just two images, and it draws the rectangle based on the difference. So
yeah, that's what we had before, but we had a lot of issues, so we decided not.
Okay.
But yeah, that's nice. We had the same, like on every click or any syntax or whatever, it was taking a screenshot and you could compare. And we had something on Allure, it could put side by side, so even without the tool, it could go there and compare the two of them. So, and Allure is super helpful in these cases. You can put the two screenshots side by side, and you can give the comparison to percentage. Is it?
I have a question. In which environment do you run the testing? Test environment, or when merging to the production, for example?
That depends. For example, that also depends on the projects. So as I said before, Comutic you can test in production because you don't influence anyone on the other side. On Buzz on Demand it's impossible because if the service is running and a driver is driving and you create a booking, the driver is going to receive the booking. So it depends on the project. I really like to test in production, but in some cases just not possible. We have 3 testing environment and 1 acceptance and 1 beta. So we can run on whatever environment we want.
Okay.
Did you make a unit test too, or there is only UI tests in your apps?
UI and API. The developers do the unit testing.
Okay.
I mean, you can take a look at the UI tests because sometimes you discover mistakes on the actual code, but I don't like to write unit tests because in some way it changes my focus, and I stop worrying about how the user is going to use the application, and I start thinking in the same way as the developer is writing and not think about the edge cases and everything. So I don't like to go too deep. I prefer to stay a little bit outside. Anything else? Let's grab a beer and do some network. Thank you.
Thank you.